Hey, welcome to NeedleStack from Authenticate. If you've been watching or listening to the podcast before, you're going to go, who the hell is this guy? And who's the guy next to him? So listen, my name's AJ Nash, and I'm joined. Robert, you want to introduce yourself? I don't have to give him your name.
I'm Robert Vamosi, and I'm happy to be here. AJ and I both have our own podcasts, but we're chipping in and doing the co-host thing here at NeedleStack.
That's right. So we wanted to get a chance to get on and say, hey, listen, we're the new hosts. We're going to introduce ourselves, who we are, why we're here, what brought us here. And this will be the most boring of all of our episodes, although I hope you listen to the whole thing, because we're going to have guests after this. It's not just going to be us talking. We'll have guests that'll be much more interesting than both of us, but we have some stories to tell, and we thought we'd get into it. So, hey, Robert, you want to kick off and give people like your elevator pitch, your background, where you come from, that kind of thing?
Sure. Yeah. I started out as a journalist working at ZDNet and CNET, fell into the security beat and stayed with it for a really, really long time. Continued after I left CNET to write for Forbes and PC Magazine and other publications, always on the security beat. Wrote a book called When Gadgets Betray Us, which is all about the security of IoT. And then started working in product management or product marketing, at various startups and various security related industries. And at the end of that process, I produced a book with Kevin Mitnick about the art of invisibility, which is very relevant here because we talk about how to disappear online, which is kind of the opposite problem that people have who use our product here at Authenticate is how do they do it? And it might be instructive to talk a little bit more in this podcast about that. But AJ, you've got a colorful past. Why don't you share yours?
I've got a colorful past. That's one way of putting it. That sounds terrible. I do have a colorful past. Not nearly as interesting as yours. I'm not going to, I didn't write any books and I can't drop Kevin Mitnick's name around. But I have my own stories, I suppose. So for my background, about 19 years in the government space originally. So U.S. Air Force, and then stayed in as a defense contractor in the intelligence community the whole time. So counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, countering trafficking in persons, chased war criminals for a while, and counter threats in cyberspace for a handful of years there. Almost all of that time, pretty much all of it, was spent at Fort Meade. So that's NSA and U.S. Cyber Command. I've been in the private sector for about 9 years now. Primarily, I build intel programs or I help people build and mature their programs, which has led to a lot of work with marketing teams, a lot of work with sales teams and product, go-to-market strategies, things like that. And I turned into sort of this evangelist thought leadership guy along the way somewhere, where I also have my own podcast and I do, I travel and I speak and I write and I get quoted in newspapers and that kind of thing. I don't have the discipline to write a book. I have tried. I have been offered contracts. I have started. I don't have the discipline, so I got nothing but respect for that. I think I'm a short form guy. Maybe I'll get better at it someday. But yeah, I'm now here at Authenticate. I'm super excited to be on NeedleStack and hosting this with you because this is what I'm passionate about is intelligence and security. I also, I've been an Authenticate customer forever, basically, like almost at the very beginning. So I use this tool, the company's tools, the original tools, the platform now. I've used it from the very beginning. So I was excited to get a chance to actually officially, partner up and work together on these things. So I definitely want to dig into the book you were talking about, and how people make themselves disappear, right? Because that is a really interesting topic. And I can talk a little bit about what happens if you don't do it right. And, on the intel side, how do you find people? Last night, for instance, not to ramble, but I was at a quick chat with a buddy of mine from the Air Force days, a million years ago. And lo and behold, I don't know how I ended up in a rabbit hole. He challenged me, finding his mother's maiden name and his social security number, whatever. And so that's what I'm doing. So I'm suddenly doing the job and like texting him like, this is where you're from. This is your address. This is your house. And here's a picture. And I did it for a little while. I was like, listen, I'm not going to keep going. I could get the maiden name. I got a bunch of his relatives. I would have figured it out. I was like, I'm not going to go out little rabbit holes. Nobody's paying me to do this. But that's also what happens with people like you are researchers and intel people is you just do it. It's fun and it becomes a thing, right? You want to answer the question. The people like me and like you, I'm sure, and a lot of others, I'm the guy who's got my phone out the whole time watching TV and movies because where'd that person, how do I know that person and where were they before? And then I go further. It's not just, what movie were they in, but it's like, who are they married to and where are they from originally? I didn't realize what year they were born. It's ridiculous. It's unhealthy shit a lot of times, but just going down these rabbit holes. So let's go back to you instead though. Let's talk about the book and how people make themselves disappear.
So I think what you're describing is a way of thinking about the world.
Mm.
And once you've crossed over into the world of security, you don't see the world quite the way everybody else does. And so, yes, that natural curiosity, like, did I go to school with that person? How can I find out? What sort of tools do we have? We have a lot of tools today. When I first met, and I'm going to drop Kevin's name one more time, and then
Do
I'll
it.
stop.
He was amazing.
He was an amazing person. We were talking about what we wanted to do in the book, and he said, "I can get you the social security number of just about anybody." And I said, "Challenge on." Didn't give him permission to do mine. He picked a politician. I'll just leave it at that. And went in, and turns out he was a private investigator, and he had a license. He had a license to use a particular tool. But within a few minutes, he had amazing facts about this politician, and I was just blown away. And it just kind of said, "Hey, it's hard to hide." So I challenged him. I said, in the book, let's talk about what you would have to do, because Kevin was on the run for many years from the FBI and had aliases, did all this back in the analog days when you would literally photocopy a driver's license and when you would literally have paperwork to carry around with you. Today, we're in the digital world. So I challenged him. I said, what would you do today to disappear online? And it was an interesting conversation, which made its way into the book, where we start out with, you want cash, obviously.
Sure. Yeah.
Got to have cash because anything else is traceable.
Crypto now, I guess.
Well,
crypto's
you
also
start out
traceable.
with cash.
Yeah.
And then what he recommended was getting a cutout. And a cutout is someone that's not you, has no relationship to you in any way, shape, or form. And in the book, we talk about going to a park and meeting somebody and saying, hey, here's $500. Go buy an HP laptop for me at the Best Buy over there. And I'll give you another $500 when you come back. Or a burner phone, whatever it is you're trying to obtain. So it's not you making that transaction. So fine, that happens. Here's the interesting thing to me. You don't go home with that burner phone or that burner laptop and turn it on. Why? Because technology is promiscuous. Your home router is going to try to connect to that new device that just winked into existence. That new device is going to say, hey, is there a router around here? And if you're ever caught for whatever reason or the suspect of an investigation, they can look at those router logs and determine that that burner laptop or burner phone was connected to your home in some way, shape, or form. So you take this pristine burner laptop and you go to another town somewhere and you go find an internet cafe and you connect. But you don't really want to use your Gmail account or any service that you have. You cannot use that. You are someone new. So you've just created a new identity, whatever that is, online. And to your point, AJ, you would then go and create an email account for this individual that you would use to create a crypto wallet. And with that crypto wallet now open in your account, you would go find a crypto ATM and put those dollar bills in there and turn it into crypto that you could then use to purchase a VPN, to purchase other things that you would need to continually cloak your anonymity. Now, the problem here is that we are human beings. And if you break any one of these steps along the way, you got to go back to zero.
Right.
And get another burner, get another cutout, It's so complicated. And so my thesis in the book was basically that you can't hide. All you can do is put a lot of blockers between you and someone who's trying to investigate you.
Yeah. Well, that's true. I mean, you can't. I think you can hide from a certain level of person, right? And that's the idea. I think the idea is just to make it more difficult, right? To make somebody's got to be really committed. If you work hard, like you're talking about, you can make it harder for the average person to find you. You can hide from most people, John Q. Public. But somebody who's determined to find you, especially if they're a government and has more access to data and information, yeah, you can't hide. We're past the point. I think, practically speaking, sure, if you get all cash and you get gold and you go off into some ranch, you go into uncharted territory in a state someplace and become a hermit, hiding in the caverns of a national park somewhere, maybe you can hide forever. But practically speaking, you can't hide. And like you said, it's just human nature. It's too hard. It doesn't take much to make that mistake where you have that technology, but you connected to something. And well, there you go. Now it's blown. It happens regularly. I've seen professionals who will do it. They have great obfuscation tools, and then they forget which tool they're in, and they go to their own personal bank account. That's it.
Yeah.
It's game over. You've given it away now. You see it happen with social media accounts. We see famous people with multiple accounts, and they accidentally, you know, tweet themselves a compliment on the wrong account. Right? It's people. Like, people make mistakes eventually, and dedicated and determined investigators and researchers work hard to find those mistakes and to wait for those mistakes to happen, and they can be patient and they can make the effort. So yeah, I think you're right. It's impossible to hide from everybody, I think, but it is possible to hide from most people
Yes.
if we make the efforts. Going back to the discussion, I was talking to a buddy of mine yesterday. I was surprised, and he's a professional, by the way. He's in our industry. He's an Intel guy. He's a counter Intel guy. He's a pro. I was surprised to find so much of his stuff in databases. These aggregators and these databases, because you can request to have it removed. Now, to be honest, it removed, it popped back up, it goes back and down. And so he just doesn't even bother, which surprised me. I, on the other hand, make the effort to keep things out of there. So but that's because he's also accepted, like, you can't really hide. Like, it's okay. It's the idea is to decide what your level of risk is. He's not a public figure, so people don't go looking for him to begin with. I hide a few more things because I spend a little more time in public. But to be truthful, Intel and military folks, it's defense in depth, but a physical standpoint. In cyber, we talk about defense in depth, but in the physical standpoint, it's, listen, I've got cameras and alarms and dogs and guns. I also try to keep my personal stuff off the internet as much as I can, but I also recognize that it's impossible. So you have to have these backup plans to say, hey, listen, bad things could happen. People could make choices that you don't want them to make. And so you have to have a backup plan after a backup plan, which is an unfortunate, pragmatic way of looking at things when you are a security professional, an Intel pro. You've been doing this stuff for a while. You just recognize you're forced to think very close to paranoid. Like, there's a fine line. Most people I know in this industry at some point question, am I paranoid? Which normally tells us we're not. It's the point when you stop questioning that you should really worry. I do it regularly now. I sit around and have to I bounce ideas off people and say, listen, tell me, have I gone too far now? Am I all the way, through the looking glass? Or am I still logical here? I don't want to be the person who goes too far. And so you've got to keep track of that, because it's easy in this world to go too far, because we've seen a lot and we've done a lot, and we've seen bad guys do a lot of things. The people you're chasing, you see a lot of things, you realize, oh, I could do that too, and you start emulating some of their techniques and tactics sometimes, because some things are smart and make sense, that obfuscation approach. And the next thing you know, you wake up one day and you're like, Jesus, I think I'm money laundering right now. I didn't really think about it, but I think what I just did was illegal, and maybe I should not do that anymore. I haven't, by the way, for anybody wondering, don't call the cops.
Yeah, don't be confessional here.
No, I'm not. This is all recorded. But you start figuring that out. You're like, where are the lines going to be? Am I going to cross a line where I break a law that I don't intend to? The same thing if you're investigating other people. Where are those lines going to be? If you're doing your diligence, you're doing your work. When have you crossed over? When have you gone too far? And people have different lines for that. I know people who have personally, physically engaged with targets they were researching. Target didn't know because they wanted to get that close and they wanted to understand that much. Well, that's a risk. Some people would say that's some corporations say that's way against their policies. Some will say do whatever you got to do. And so it's a real complicated world. But it all starts, like you said, with this whole: can you hide? And the answer is generally no. You can, but you can from the average person. It's I'm sure you've seen it too. We talk a lot about domestic issues, unfortunately, and stalking and things like that. And there are some good tools to help with that. But again, people who've gone down that path, who've dealt with that challenge, I'm sure if they're listening right now, they're saying, yeah, you can never hide. Like, that's the determined person. It's very hard to make yourself invisible from people who have known you and want to find you again. So the best you can do is some of the techniques that I'm sure you have, talked about in the book, and then we can talk about a little bit here, and then just defense in depth and have the next plan and the next plan. And at some point live the life, right? Which, and I'm not going to lecture people on how hard this is and try to pretend I know the answers, but living in fear is very hard. So you try to make all the prep you can, and then just accept this is as good as it can be, unfortunately, sometimes, because it's an interconnected world. We're all just dependent on each other and connected to each other. And some people lean way into that and maybe realize later they wish they hadn't. Everything they said is there forever. Good luck going back and scrubbing your social media. Somebody's probably already captured it. The Wayback Machine might already have it if somebody wanted it. So, that stuff doesn't go away either. If you regret that you told all this information and now everybody knows your passwords because they can figure it out because they can guess it, you better come up with a much more complicated password because that stuff's out there forever. So yeah, I mean, it's I hate to feel like it's a dangerous world. I don't want to scare people or anything. It's a complicated world, and we're all sort of responsible for recognizing that and then trying to figure out where our risk level is. How much can you escape and disappear? How much can you not? And then know where your risk lies in between those places.
That's generally my response when someone asks me, like, how do you do this? It's like you have to have a personal risk factor. You have to decide for yourself how much information you want to give out. I once had a girlfriend who felt like the whole world had her social security number. She didn't care. And I was just like, are you crazy? So, it was her comfort level to
Mm-hmm.
share as much information about her as she could.
Yep.
I was quite the opposite in that this is all going to come back and bite you someday. So,
Mm-hmm.
I guess she felt in her circles it wasn't. And so she was comfortable with it. But
Yeah. Well, and she
I
probably had
feel
monitoring, I imagine, credit monitoring and things like that.
she did.
Yeah.
And Kevin actually had his social security number posted on the internet. You can
Mm-hmm.
look it up.
Sure.
And I said, like, how do you feel about that? And he was just like, it's out there. There's
Yeah.
nothing I can do about it now. You can't retract it. So,
Yep. Well, and that's another
uh,
interesting point. Like growing up in Intel, so I said I was in the Intel community, so I grew up in the Air Force essentially. Joined a little late. I was 21, turned 22 at basic, but so I've never had a Facebook account with my name and face on it. I never did. I never had MySpace. If anybody remembers MySpace, I never did any of these things. Right. So I had a very low profile, and I was in the government. I had clearances, and I really didn't have a social media profile at all until I moved on to LinkedIn when I was going to get out. But that was an important thing for me because I didn't want it out there. So I kept everything very close hold. I had the clearances, et cetera. And then OPM gets compromised. And it's like, well,
yeah.
I guess all my effort was for nothing because the government just gave everything away anyway. And I became less concerned. I changed my tactics a little bit. I don't run around telling people my social security number, but so much was compromised. And then it was just one after the next after the next. Every credit card I've had has been compromised. My information's everywhere, just like almost everybody else's. And so that's why I reverted to more about, well, defense in depth. Okay, so I have credit monitoring. So I try to keep myself off these databases. I have more physical security than would seem reasonable, I think, to some people, uh, because that was the only thing I could control anymore. I can't retract it. Like you said, once it's out there, it's out there. I'm not throwing my social security number out on LinkedIn or on Twitter or whatever. I'm not going to say it here today, but somebody can probably find it. So I have to do credit monitoring and all those other things, and it's unfortunate, but it's forever. We're not getting a new social security number. You don't get a new identification. You can't reinvent yourself, really, despite what the movies will say. And so then you just have to pivot. And it's interesting. I wrote something on this not long ago that it's generationally, it's also different. Um, the younger generations now, make myself sound really old when I say that, they don't prioritize security and safety and privacy the same way, statistically speaking. I'm sure some do. So if anybody is a Zoomer, don't come yelling at me. But statistically they don't as much. They're more public, they're more out there, they worry less about this stuff. So security has become deprioritized in some sense, and now these people are, this is, generations are becoming more and more the consumers, which sadly means I think we're seeing companies deprioritize security because companies do whatever makes money, and if customers don't leave when they get compromised, then why should they try to protect data? So we're actually, I think, in a lot of ways we're having more and more of this stuff happen because we've got generations coming up saying I put all my stuff in the world, I don't worry about privacy. And it's interesting to watch how you got from like boomers to Gen X, and Y and Z and where we are, and you see that that's shifted. And it was interesting to see that from my perspective because when I moved from the government to the private sector, government was, everybody was locked down. We were all top secret clearance, and don't tell anybody anything about anything really. And when I moved in the private sector, people were still very concerned about it, and I've watched it change over the years. There were lots of studies at the time. I worked at a bank, and I was told the reason we do this is if we don't protect, then people won't trust us, and if they don't trust us, they'll move their money. And now you can do the research and go, no, nobody does that. As it turns out, my credit cards get compromised constantly, and they just send me a new one. I don't change banks. I haven't changed airlines because they've been compromised, or hotels. I still shop at Amazon and Target and everywhere else because everything gets compromised. So why how do we get companies to continue to care? Which may be a whole other topic for another day. Frankly, it's a whole show probably. Um, anyway, so it is complicated. You can't, like you said, you can't really disappear, and you just sort of have to find the risk, and that's challenging because I don't think a lot of people know how to gauge risk. How to calculate risk. And people have it's very subjective to most people. Frankly, even with systems, it's somewhat subjective. And that's challenging because you see people take amazing risks, and other people are like, "Nah, it's not much of a risk at all." You just go, "Okay, well, you see the world differently than I do."
So you and I are part of I'm going to say the golden age of security. Um, a lot of great people are our age, like, the great hackers and stuff. And then going into doing podcasts, it's like some people are only known by their handle,
Yeah.
and trying to connect with them, good luck. I mean, I do ultimately, I have those connections, but there are some people that only know Dark Tangent,
Yep.
and they don't know it's Jeff Moss, the founder of DEF
Right.
CON and Black Hat. So
Right.
it's like, or you keep those in your mind. It's like I have this parallel set of names. People I know online as this
Mm-hmm.
are really this in reality, and they live
Yeah.
in Baltimore and they live wherever. It's like I know these things about them, but
Mm-hmm.
to your point about obfuscating and hiding, it's like they've done a really good job of having an online presence with their nick.
Yep.
And it's like
No, you're
we
right.
live with this duality that other people don't live with.
No, you're right. People were their handle for a long time, whatever it was, and could be a lot of different things, mostly inappropriate for podcasts. Uh, but you're right. It's changed, right? And that said, not to plug myself at all, but like I said, I have a podcast just like you do. My guest, the podcast that just went out this week, uh, she goes by her handle, and that's it. Like we didn't even use her name on the podcast. Now I know her name, but very few people do. I don't even call her name. To be honest, when I say I know her name, I knew her name. I'd have to go check. I honestly don't. I just call her by her nickname too. I know her legal name. It's someplace. I never use it. I don't remember it. I'm sure she prefers it that way. And yeah, she just goes by her handle, and she has for a long time. She's a goon with DEF CON as well. And that's different now. And I still think, and I sound old when I do these. I don't spend enough time with the youngest generations, that are on the internet right now. I don't know if they still use handles as much, or if they switch back and forth, or they go away. I'm sure there's some people that still do, but it does seem to be different now. I think there's more of a emphasis on being famous instead of being hidden. That just
There
changed.
is. There is. A few years ago, I was involved with the Capture the Flag teams,
Mm,
some of which went to DEF CON.
yeah.
And they had handles, but I knew them by their legal names, and they came on my other podcasts as who they were, and they were
Hmm.
famous. It was like, oh, you got to interview so and so, and it's like,
Yeah.
sure, okay. So I think that you're right. I think the younger generation is free to use their own names. As I said, we were part of the golden age, and so back when Loft and other organizations were in existence, it was questionable. And, having worked with Kevin, I feel it was kind of unfair that he had to go to prison at an early age, and it affected him for the rest of his life. And all because he was trying to teach himself how to compute. It was like he wasn't monetizing it. He wasn't committing theft of services necessarily. And so, it was kind of crazy back then that you could spend more time in prison than a rapist for just tinkering with a computer. And so people needed those nicks. But today, a lot has changed.
Yeah, I mean, he was ahead of his time. Not to praise, spend too much time praising him, but that's the facts. If a young person today grew up doing what Kevin did then, they wouldn't go to jail; they'd get hired. Like it's that's as simple as that. You'd be like, "Oh my God, hire this guy! This guy's amazing. We should bring him in." The government would want to hire him. It's things have changed. I think there was less knowledge and more fear, and the people who did have a lot of knowledge of these technologies, it was a smaller group of people, and you were either the good guys, I guess. You were in the government generally, or you were hackers, which meant you were bad guys. And any hacker I know will tell you hackers aren't bad guys. Like it's not black hat. Like that's a different thing. Hackers are just people finding new ways to do things. A lot of times they're the ones that make things more efficient. And everybody I know has hacked something. You've hacked a system, you've hacked a service, you've hacked a customer service system. You've done something. You've hacked a ticketing system. We hack our own brains sometimes to force ourselves to do things we don't want to do. Like most people I know have figured out a way to hack something. They just don't call it that. It's but then now like the term life hacks now exists. I think people have kind of gathered that's the whole same thing. Like people who are hackers, it doesn't mean you were in a cloak and the hoodie and in a dark room and you were breaking into whatever database. It's not all war games, which was a great movie by the way, but it's not all war games. And but even then, if you want to be clear, like even using that example, they weren't being malicious in war games. They were curious, and curious and went the wrong way with it. But even that movie, it wasn't meant to be malicious. The movie Hackers, which is a great classic movie, not really malicious, a little more mischievous, but not really malicious, except the one guy who would have been roughly our age group, which says a lot about us, I guess.
Hack the planet.
That's right. So I mean, things have changed. Like you said, the hackers now are, most of them, yeah, you know who they are. Fame has changed. The desire to be known has very much, I think, replaced the desire to be unknown for a lot of people. But there's some who still really want to be unknown, and that either means they're really good or really bad. And I don't know if I want to know.
So I want to personally take back the word hacking.
Yeah.
Hacking means to take something apart. That's all it means. And all the researchers I work with are hackers. So I qualify it and say criminal hacker. When I'm talking about someone who crosses the line and breaks the law, it's clear. They are a criminal hacker. They're not part of my community, not at all. So I think that needs to be re-owned. And there's actually an organization called Hacking is Not a Crime.
Yep.
And they show up at DEF CON and they have stickers, and they're a great organization because they're doing that work. And there are other great organizations out there too, which I'm sure we'll touch upon in future episodes, because you and I both bring a number of people to the table, and we've got other people working for us here to get some really great guests to come on the future NeedleStack episodes.
Yeah, I mean, we're really lucky. Listen, we're not building from scratch. NeedleStack's been great. I've been a fan of the program for a long time, and it's had a couple of different hosts along the way who have all been great, and we're still working with them. Listen, I'll call out Aubrey right now is here. You guys don't see her, but she is. And I'm thankful for it because she's great. And I'm really excited to be able to continue to work with great people. We're not building from scratch. It's just a minor shift in how the show is going to go. But we were lucky enough that we're going to be talking to a great audience of really bright, interesting people who want to learn different things. And like you said, you and I just bring some different people in and some different opportunities. That's all. So it's just a chance to add a different flavor. But we're lucky, this isn't building from scratch, which is really hard to do. I know, because my podcast struggles a lot. So we're going to have a chance to do a lot of very cool things. We don't have a lot of overlap in our social circles, which is kind of interesting. We have a little bit, but not a lot, which is great because I think we will bring some very cool people in, and probably find out we should have had more overlap. It's just kind of weird how it's worked, but people from the DEF CON community, people from the Black Hat community, people from the rest of cybersecurity and intelligence and all of these areas and open source, and it's gonna be a lot of fun, man. I'm really excited about it. I'm so happy that you're here. And that I'm here and that we're getting a chance to do this together. I think it's gonna be a really fun adventure. I hope people enjoy it as much as we're going to. And it's going to be a blast. I'm so happy to be here. I'm really looking forward to just having a lot of fun conversations and probably doing a whole hell of a lot of editing because I can't stop talking. So, and this podcast is meant to be much shorter than my own podcast. So I'm sure somebody's gonna have a lot of time editing, which will be you. So we probably should wrap up here. I think we've done a bit to intro. What do you want for some closing thoughts, man, to leave people with as we get ready to go into the season here and get a bunch of stuff done for folks?
The season?
Well, what you want to call it?
Yeah, well, closing thoughts. I really want to know more about your intelligence background as much as you can share, because I know people from the NSA, and it's always been like, I worked at the NSA.
Yeah, no such agency.
So exactly, and no real office, and all of those acronyms. It's a world that could be fascinating to learn from, and I'd be happy to share some of my security stories, not just with Kevin, with other people that I've worked with and written articles with and so forth. So I think the two of us together will bring a different energy, but there's still that basic intelligence OSINT community that has been so strong with NeedleStack. And like you said, I've been listening to the podcast and it's been great. So I'm kind of intimidated by taking it on, but I think with a great partner like you, we'll do well.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's interesting. I won't go into too much detail, but since you mentioned it, I'll just hint. No such agency, right? So that's my actual. That's the crossover. When I went to NSA, when I first started there in 1999, you couldn't find NSA. It really was difficult. When I PCS there, I was in the Air Force and I drove. It was nighttime for what it's worth. It was like midnight. I could not find the agency because at the time it was like one left turn off of 32 in Maryland, no lights, no signage or anything. And of course, at like midnight or whenever, I could not find it. I ended up spending the night in a cheap motel. And then the next morning, I got got some instructions. Well, now you can see it from anywhere. Like there's signs that say NSA from the highway, and you can. I mean, there's 20 ways to get there now. I mean, you can, the visibility is there. They've knocked down all the woods and everything. So even the agency is more interested. I wouldn't say more interested in fame. It's probably not true, but it's easier to find for sure than it used to be. Even the privacy of the agencies themselves have changed. Yeah, I'm happy. I mean, we'll get a chance to talk about some stuff that goes on in those places. I will tell you, in a nutshell, as I've told people, working in the intelligence community is 80% mundane day to day and 20%, wow, this is pretty amazing stuff. And so you play for the wows. And sometimes it's not 80-20. Sometimes it's a lot less than 20%. And for periods of time, sadly, it could be a lot more than 20% if you're doing wartime operations or something. It is neat when you know the news before the news comes out. That's always fun. Occasionally, or the news comes out and you kind of chuckle and go, well, I can't wait to tell people that that's not quite, it's not 100% the story, but we'll leave it alone. But I will say most of the mystique and most of the skepticism people have is unfortunate. Secrets need to be kept for national security, but I wish more people were able, and I get why they don't. I wish more people were able to trust the government, because I can tell you that the government's not, well, historically at least, the government has not been out to get us. And
historically,
a lot of the conspiracy theories are funny to listen to. I will tell you the same thing I tell people: you're wrong, and yet there's a few conspiracies out there you don't know anything about, and that's the funny thing about it. So it's not ridiculous to think there aren't any, because there are some things that people don't know for good reason. But I will say that the few that I'm aware of, at least, they're not harmful, and there's a reason that everybody doesn't know everything. So yeah, we'll get a chance to dig into some of that stuff. It was a fun time. I was lucky. I was lucky to have the opportunity to do some cool things and meet some amazing people, and we'll bring some of that on here.
All right, and we'll pick it up the next time.
Very cool. All right, well, thanks, Robert, and thanks everybody who's been listening and watching this one. I'm looking forward to it. I know we both are. We'll be on with more stuff and guests, and we're gonna have a really fun time here, and we're gonna be entertaining and funny and irreverent and all that stuff. So look forward to hearing feedback from y'all, and we're going to try to change and improve as we go. So please, if you like this, follow us and subscribe and provide feedback. If you hate it, tell us you hate it. I guess be nice about it, but whatever, let us know, and we'll keep working to be better, because this is about you guys. It's about people listening and watching. So yeah, man, thanks for this. I appreciate it. Look forward to doing more of these.